She walked into the store like anyone else, just hoping to pick up a few things. Dressed simply, with her hair tied back and an old purse slung over her shoulder, she didn't look like someone who would turn heads. But that day she did, and not for the right reasons. A few of the staff glanced at her, whispered, and before long, the store manager came forward with a cold, forced smile. They made her feel like she didn't belong. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet the way they treated her, the rude tone, the judgmental looks, and finally asking her to leave, made her feel small and humiliated in front of everyone. What they didn't know was who she really was, or more importantly, who her husband was. She left the store quietly, with her heart heavy and her dignity bruised. But what happened next would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire staff who had looked down on her. Her husband, a kind and quiet man, wasn't one to make scenes. But when he heard how his wife was treated, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. Instead, he made a phone call that would flip the story upside down. Because this simple woman, the one they pushed away, was about to walk back into that store, not as a customer, but as the wife of the man who now owned it. What made her husband decide to buy the store? And what happened when she returned to face those who once humiliated her? You won't believe the reaction on their faces when the truth came out. Stay with us. The next part of this story will leave you speechless. Her name was Maria. She had always lived a quiet life, never one to show off or draw attention. She believed in kindness, humility, and treating everyone with respect, whether they wore a suit or swept the floor. That's how she was raised. Her husband, Daniel, was the same. Soft-spoken, gentle and successful, but never flashy. Most people wouldn't guess he was the owner of several businesses across the city. He kept his life private, and Maria never felt the need to show off his status. To her, love and simplicity mattered more than wealth. That day at the store, though, something broke inside her. Not just from the way the manager treated her, but from the whispers and stares. She had only asked for help finding an item, and instead, she was spoken to like she didn't belong there. She wasn't loud or rude. She simply stood there in silence as they asked her to leave, saying they didn't want trouble. When she got home, Daniel noticed her eyes were red. He asked her gently what had happened. At first, she didn't want to say, she didn't want to bother him. But he listened carefully, every word sinking deep. And when she finished, he didn't say much. Just one quiet sentence. Which store was it? Daniel had always believed that power was best used to uplift, not to punish. But disrespecting his wife, the woman who stood by him through everything, was a line that should never have been crossed. So while the store employees went about their day, unaware of the storm quietly brewing, Daniel was already making calls behind the scenes. But what was he really planning? And why was he so calm, even after hearing what had happened? While Daniel stayed calm on the outside, something had shifted inside him. He wasn't angry in a way most people might expect. He didn't raise his voice or slam doors, but his silence was heavy, focused. Behind that calm was a man thinking carefully, planning something not out of revenge, but out of principle. He didn't want anyone else to go through what Maria had faced, being judged for how they looked, treated as less just because they didn't fit someone else's idea of important. Meanwhile, back at the store, the employees went on with their day like nothing had happened. The store manager, Kevin, even laughed about it in the break room. She looked like she couldn't afford anything past the front door, he joked. A few of the staff chuckled awkwardly, some unsure if it was right to laugh, but no one said anything, except for Rachel, a new employee who had witnessed the whole thing. She had seen the look on Maria's face, that quiet embarrassment. It had stayed with her all day. Rachel didn't know who Maria was, but she knew that what happened wasn't right. Still, she was afraid to speak up. Kevin had a reputation for making people's jobs difficult if they crossed him. At home, Daniel was speaking to his legal team and partners. The store was already part of a small, struggling franchise, and Daniel had recently been looking into potential retail investments. When he found out this was one of them, it only made his decision easier. As days passed, Maria said nothing more about it. She didn't ask Daniel what he was doing, but she noticed how focused he'd become. Something was in motion, she could feel it, but she had no idea just how far it would go. 2 weeks later, the store buzzed with its usual routine. Customers drifting in and out, employees chatting behind the counters, and Kevin giving orders with his usual smug confidence. He had already forgotten Maria's face. To him, she was just another nobody who didn't belong. But the air inside the store felt different that morning. There was a quiet tension that no one could quite place, like the calm before a storm. Rachel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her gut. Something was coming, she just didn't know what. She'd tried to speak to Kevin earlier in the week, suggesting they handle customers more respectfully, but he brushed her off. "You'll understand once you've been in retail long enough," he said with a smirk. She bit her tongue and kept working, but the guilt still sat heavy on her shoulders. Around noon, a group of well-dressed individuals entered the store, clipboards in hand, speaking in low tones as they observed the layout and customer service. Kevin walked over, assuming they were from corporate, and greeted them with his usual fake charm. But instead of answering his questions, one of them handed him a sealed envelope. His face paled as he read the letter. His smile dropped. Rachel watched from behind the register, her heart racing. She couldn't hear what was being said, but the energy shifted fast. Kevin looked stunned, confused, and suddenly worried. The other employees began whispering, watching him stumble over his words. And then, just minutes later, the doors opened again. Maria walked in. Not in worn shoes and a tired face like last time, but with quiet confidence and grace. She wasn't there to shop. Everyone turned to look. The room froze. And then, behind her, Daniel stepped through the door. Daniel stepped in without saying a word, his eyes scanning the room calmly. The employees fell silent. Kevin's hands were still clutching the letter, his lips parted, as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. Daniel wasn't dressed in a suit or anything flashy, just a clean shirt and calm presence. But something about him made the entire store stand still. Maria didn't speak either. She just stood there beside him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, no one moved. And then the man who had handed Kevin the letter stepped forward and quietly said, "As of today, this store is under new ownership." The words hit like thunder. A few gasps broke the silence. Kevin looked around, as if expecting someone to say it was all a joke, but no one did. His voice cracked as he stammered, "There must be some mistake." Daniel finally stepped forward, meeting Kevin's eyes with a calm that cut deeper than anger. "No mistake," he said quietly. "We believe every person who walks into this store deserves dignity, something you chose to forget." And just as Kevin started to respond, a second twist arrived. Another man entered the store, older, with a confident stride and sharp eyes. Daniel turned, surprised for the first time. It was Mr. Collins, the former owner of the franchise, someone Daniel thought had stepped away from the business entirely. But now here he was, holding his own envelope and looking straight at Daniel. "We need to talk," Mr. Collins said, his tone firm. The room went silent again. Daniel looked at Maria, then back at Mr. Collins. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about the store anymore. Something bigger was unfolding, and Daniel had just walked into the middle of it. Everyone watched as Daniel and Mr. Collins stepped aside to speak in private. Maria stood still, her eyes following them, unsure of what this sudden change meant. The employees whispered behind the counters, some still in shock, others nervously watching Kevin, who looked like he'd just seen his career slip through his fingers. In the office, Mr. Collins placed the envelope on the table between them. "I heard about what happened to your wife," he said. "That's not how we built this business. I stepped back last year, but after getting calls about the recent management issues, I started looking closer." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "So you knew this was going on?" "I didn't," Collins said, shaking his head. "But I should have, and I'm sorry." which is why I'm here. He opened the envelope, not with documents challenging Daniel's purchase, but with something else entirely, a formal offer to partner. You bought the store, but the franchise has over 20 locations, he said. I want you to help fix them, bring back the values we started with, treat people right, not just customers, the staff too, people like Rachel. Daniel was stunned. He had come to make a point, to stand up for Maria. But now he was being handed something bigger, a chance to change a system that had forgotten its purpose. Back on the floor, Kevin was called into the office. When he came out, his name badge was gone. Rachel watched in disbelief as he walked past her, no longer the one in charge. Instead, a new manager was announced, someone who knew what respect looked like. And just as things settled, Maria smiled softly. But before they could leave, her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Another store, another report, same treatment. Daniel looked at her. Looks like we're not done yet. Maria looked up from her phone and met Daniel's eyes. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet strength. What started as a painful moment had become something bigger. They didn't just want to make a statement anymore. They wanted to build something better. In the following weeks, Daniel accepted Mr. Collins' offer and began working closely with the franchise team. He visited other stores quietly, just as Maria had done that first day, observing how customers were treated, how employees were spoken to. He made notes, listened, and slowly started reshaping the company's culture, not with threats or power plays, but with dignity and fairness. Respect became the foundation of every store. Rachel, the once silent employee, became a key part of the training team, sharing her experience and helping others learn how to lead with kindness. She found her voice and used it to make a difference. Maria never asked to be at the center of it all, but her story quietly traveled through every branch, not as gossip, but as a reminder that every customer matters, that you never know someone's story, and that the way you treat people, especially when no one's watching, reveals who you really are. Kevin moved on, his lesson learned the hard way. No longer in a position of power, he had time to reflect. Whether he changed for the better, no one really knew. But the store he once managed was no longer the same. As for Maria and Daniel, they never returned to the spotlight. They simply went back to living their quiet life, still humble, still kind. But now they had left a mark, not with money, but with values. And in a world that often judges by appearances, their story reminded everyone what true worth really looks like.